And talk about how long this judicial process took.
Even though I filed within 24 hours of my assault, it still took a year and a half to get to the sentencing, and then after that, another year and a half of the appeal for the case to finally be closed. So a total of almost 4 years of my life were invested in this case, where I felt stuck, where I didn't have the option to leave, where I was forced to return again and again to this story. So know that even if you file that quickly, that's how long it's going to take.
Talk about that period of time when they were developing the evidence, when you heard the trial would take place, who you understood your assailant to be, how he was described, Brock Turner, and how you were described, and your decision to remain anonymous, to remain Emily Doe.
Yeah, he was spoken about in terms of his accolades primarily. His smiling photo was used in most of the articles. There were quotes from his previous swim coaches talking about how wonderful this was and how it was a tragedy that had befallen him. It sounded so passive, the reporting of it, as if he was the victim of a crime of external circumstances, and now everything for him was hinging on this verdict, even though my loss had already taken place and had never been up for deliberation.
He was a possible Olympic contender, a student at Stanford. And how were you described? How was Emily Doe described?
I was intoxicated, blacked out, passed out, half naked. I was spoken about in terms of how many shots I had that night, of how many times I've blacked out previously in my life. All other traits were dismissed, but that's all I got to exist as and present myself as inside the courtroom.
Chanel, describe your experience of the trial when it finally took place.
I was looking forward to being able to testify and give my side of the story. That's what I thought testimony was. And I quickly learned in that environment, you are constantly discredited and diminished openly, that it becomes a game of how quickly you can answer questions that are worded in a complicated way. Half the time, I'm just trying to understand what the defense attorney is asking me. And you're forced to remember that night down to the minute. At what time did you pee? How many yards away from the house did you pee? As if I'm supposed to be living my life, counting yards, counting sips. It was extremely dehumanizing, and the way they speak to you as if you're a criminal. You feel like you've done something wrong. Surely you have if you're being treated this way.
And they brought on a blackout expert.
Correct.
Explain.
They paid $10,000 to this quote-unquote blackout expert who came in and testified that even though I was blacked out, I could have been completely willing and able to consent, that Brock had no way of knowing that I was in a blackout. So basically absolving him from the responsibility of reading social cues, of having the decency to know how to treat a person.
So the trial took 3 weeks. Talk about what Brock Turner was originally charged with, what those charges were reduced to, and then the jury verdict.
Yeah, at first he was charged with 5 felonies, 2 of which were for rape of an intoxicated person and rape of an unconscious person. Those rape charges were dropped because in California, rape is solely defined as the act of sexual intercourse. So digital penetration, fingers, doesn't count as rape. It's defined as sexual assault. Whereas the FBI's definition of rape is any kind of penetration. So the 2 rape charges were dropped. Sexual assault charges remained, and so did assault with intent to rape. That was the 3rd felony he was charged with. And my impression is that the only reason he wasn't able to rape was because he ran out of time, because 2 people intervened, not because he chose to draw the line there. I showed up to court with my family and friends. I was almost excited to show them who I was, to finally stand in my truth and not just be crying like I had been the entire time that I was on the stand. So I gave my statement. I was not allowed the time to read the entire thing. So I read an abridged version of the statement.
Before Brock Turner was sentenced for sexually assaulting you, his father wrote this long letter to the judge presiding over the case. Dan Turner complained his son's life had been ruined for 20 minutes of action fueled by alcohol and promiscuity. The letter reads in part, "These verdicts have broken and shattered him and our family in so many ways. His life will never be the one that he dreamed about and worked so hard to achieve. This is a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action out of his 20-plus years of life. The fact that he now has to register as a sexual offender for the rest of his life forever alters where he can live, visit, work, and how he will be able to interact with people and organizations."
Yeah, so I was listening, my family was listening. It was extremely difficult to hear and tolerate. And then after the father read his statement, Brock stood up and read 10 sentences. I believed it's okay that they said that because the judge will understand what's going on and will hear me. So I was patient, and when the final sentence was read, it hadn't even occurred to me that he could receive less than 1 year, which is the maximum for county jail if you've been accused of 3 felonies. I was completely in shock, and I also questioned why I had decided to read the statement. I felt like it had been my failure to properly read the room, that my emotions were inappropriate in this context. The environment was just deflating. It was so anticlimactic. The fact that we had taken 1.5 years just to get to this moment, and he announces 6 months and it's over just like that. You thought, why did I do this? Why am I here? Why can't anyone hear me? It felt humiliating. And again, my family was upset. I felt like I had to have people fighting for me, like I couldn't fight for myself. And I went home thinking I had embarrassed myself. I didn't think, wow, that was very courageous or that was eloquently written. I just tucked away my statement. It was like, I'm never doing that again.
Where were you when the verdict was handed down?
I was called to the courtroom. Basically, after closing statements are given at the trial, jury deliberation begins. They say, we're going to give you a text sometime within the next 2 weeks, and you will have 15 minutes to show up at the courthouse. So I went home and just was waiting for 2 days for the text. When I got it, I drove in, and they read out the 3 counts. And then after that, they went through each jury member and said, state your individual vote for each count. So I was sitting there, and they go through each jury member, and jury member number 1 says yes. Number 2 says yes. Yes. Is he guilty of this? Yes, 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 yes. And I was sitting there listening to the sounds of these yeses, all of that validation just like pounding and embedded inside of me. And I was struck by this immense sadness, because in the very beginning, when I knew that my assailant had been chased away, I knew the answer was yes. Of course he was guilty. I knew that from day one. But over the course of 1.5 years, I had drifted so far from myself. I had forgotten what I was worth. that I deserved to be treated better. I had learned to doubt myself and to sit with shame in months of isolation. And by the time the verdict came around, I thought, do I even deserve to be sitting here? All that's happened is that my loved ones are broken and I feel completely depleted. And then I began to hear those yeses. And I was like, oh my goodness, I completely forgot. I forgot what I was worth, and that's so sad to me. And I feel like it's my job for other victims who are experiencing this to keep them at that yes, to not let them drift so far for so long from who they are, but to keep them right there in the knowing that they're supposed to be safe.